The Federal Register is the daily record of the executive branch of the federal government. It is published each business day, and each volume covers one calendar year, so the page numbers get very large towards the end of the year. It's still available in print for now, but most people tend to use it in one of its electronic forms. FedSys has the Federal Register back to 1994, but the complete Federal Register back file to 1936 is available on Lexis and Westlaw and as PDFs on Hein Online. One of the most usable forms of the Federal Register is at federalregister.gov, which is not only easy on the eyes, it often provides advance notice of what will be in upcoming print Federal Registers. One of the most important functions of the Federal Register is to serve as the vehicle for federal rulemaking. Under the Administrative Procedures Act, rulemaking begins with a public notice. The appearance of the notice of public rulemaking in the Federal Register officially begins the rulemaking process. Sometimes an agency will solicit public input even before drafting a proposed rule, but most of the time the notice is accompanied by published proposed rules that are also accompanied by the agency's rationale in drafting the proposed rules. The proposed rules are required to be accompanied by information about how the public may comment on them. Some major rulemaking activities are accompanied by public hearings, but the primary method by which we as members of the public can comment on proposed rules is in writing. Today, you can easily comment on proposed rules through the regulations.gov website, and you can also see comments left by others and comment on those. After taking into account the comments the agency receives, they then publish in the Federal Register the final rules, which will appear in the next revision of the CFR. This final publication of the regulations includes the agency's response to the comments it received. The agency doesn't have to take your advice, but they have to show they listen to it. To find the history of a regulation, you just reverse the process. Start with the current regulation, find the source statement, that is the statement of where the final rules were published in the Federal Register. There is often a source statement for a whole CFR part, which applies to those CFR sections that don't have a separate source statement, like this section here, 1.1. Lexis calls these source statements history, and this is an example of what the same section looks like on Lexis. And Westlaw also calls them sources, and this is what one looks like on Westlaw. Sometimes an individual section within a part will not have the same source as the part as a whole. This is what a section in the print CFR looks like with a separate source statement. It isn't labeled, but it appears in square brackets at the end of the section. And this is what that statement looks like on Lexis. Again, it's labeled as history. But here on Westlaw, it's a little bit more confusing. Here is the credits Westlaw has printed. And Westlaw includes both the source statement for the whole part and the separate source statement for this individual section. It can be a little confusing because the one that applies to this section is the one that's in parentheses. The one that includes the words, unless otherwise noted, is the one for this whole part, which has been outlined in blue for you here. The one outlined in red is the one for just this section. Once you've got a regulation, let's use, for example, 16 CFR section 1107.21 from the 2013 CFR. Right in the CFR itself, it says it was amended on December 5th and takes effect on February 28th, and the final rule itself was published at 77 Federal Register, page number 72,219. I told you these page numbers get pretty large. So going to 77 Federal Register 72,219, we see the final rule published here in the December 5th Federal Register. And it also had a section that explains how the agency responded to the comments they received. So if you're trying to figure out why this section was written the way it was, you can read the agency response to comments. They usually summarize the comments and explain that explain what, if any, effect these comments had on the way the final rules were drafted. The other thing that every set of final rules will have in it is a statement of where the proposed rules had been published. In this case, it was 76th Federal Register, page 69,586. Don't you just love those page numbers? So looking at that issue of the Federal Register, this is where the agency's original notice of proposed rulemaking, the rules as drafted by the agency, and a statement of the agency's intent in drafting these rules can all be found. I put a picture of the cover of this section because the Federal Register still prints major rulemaking activities, both proposed rules and final rules, as whole separate little pamphlets. So the agencies involved can actually mail these pamphlets to interested parties, although there is pending legislation in Congress right now to discontinue the print publication of the Federal Register. But it really is important for all of us to be involved in shaping the regulations we live under. And given that legally we all have constructive knowledge of everything that's been published in the Federal Register, you really should read the Federal Register every day. Just kidding.